What's up? Welcome in. Hoge and Jahns back with you alongside Kevin Fishbain joining us. Big. Is that smile just for Northwestern's win over IU last night?
Yes.
Or was it because you're happy to be here with us?
Yes.
Nice.
Go
Good
Cats.
answer.
This is a double yes.
Jahns is feeling better.
I am.
Yesterday was a exciting day at House Hall. Good vibes all around. No one will ever remember the 10-game losing streak.
I think you guys missed a few of my chats during your show on Monday. Do you want me to read them off to you?
Yes, please.
No, they were purposely ignored, and I think Katie has since deleted them on our stream. So,
Katie knows what was up, but the only one I do remember was that instead of the MJ flu game, maybe that was like Judd Bushler playing with a head cold.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Judd Bushler was an outstanding volleyball player. Had the highest vertical on the Bulls, so I don't think that's an insult at all.
It was not meant to be. I just didn't think we were ready to go Michael Jordan flu game. That's all.
Still fighting.
Continue.
But feeling better.
I love Judd Bushler. Underrated guy.
Yeah,
he's great. Yeah. Oh yeah, he's awesome.
20% of our audience probably even knows who Judd Bushler is. That's okay.
Yeah. And I did also put in, as Katie reminds me in the chat, that I felt like Hoge was vouching for assistant special teams coach for himself for the Bears.
Was? I mean,
still is.
I officially applied. It didn't get reported. I had a Zoom call last week.
Did you say you want the job?
I started by saying I really want this job. And then I ended it by saying, "Did I tell you I want this job?" Yeah, that's how it went down. All right, enough silliness. Yesterday was a good day for the Chicago Bears. It felt like. I had a chance to talk about a lot of this yesterday on CHGO, so I really want to tee you guys up a little bit more. I will plug real quick Cole Kmet in studio on CHGO Bears today as we record this on Thursday. And he was in the room yesterday too for that press conference. So be interesting to hear from Cole and his thoughts on the hire and all that. So check that out later today, depending on when you're listening to this podcast. It'll be available as a podcast as well. But guys, we've covered a lot of these. My initial reaction yesterday was that was far and away the best introductory press conference that I've seen between all of them, the head coaching ones, the GM ones, the team president one, and endless coordinator introductory press conferences that we've had.
We still got those on the way.
Yeah, they're coming too. But would you agree with that? And I think we also need to talk about, what's really important from a good day that doesn't necessarily always result in victories.
I would start with this. It definitely felt different than 2022, where, correct me if I'm wrong, it was like a dual press conference with Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus, where that was the decision made, where Ryan Poles wasn't introduced separately. They were kind of introduced as a dual package, and Justin Fields came in later. I don't know if I didn't like the setup, but just in terms of vibe, energy, all that stuff, it felt better than 2022. Maybe similar to 2018 because you have a young offensive mind coming in like Matt Nagy. But even with Matt Nagy, there were some questions about, his offensive prowess, his play calling ability, and what the heck happened in the Kansas City Chiefs playoff game.
Right.
Yeah, I was waiting for our good friend Mark Potash to ask Ben Johnson what that wide receiver throw you called there in the second half. But I think one of the things with Ben Johnson was we know he's like this math whiz. We know he's this, as he said himself, this offensive guru. But I haven't watched a whole lot of press conferences of his. Certainly, he's never experienced anything like yesterday in terms of addressing a room like that. So if we're judging based on just that, it was incredibly impressive the way he commanded a room. And you could see how that could translate to when he steps up in front of the team for the first time, when the players return in April. You can see how that will matter come training camp and the first game of the season. And that stuff's important. And that stuff, I think, was probably lacking with the previous head coach and the play caller to start 2024 season. So I think he checked all those boxes. And yeah, I mean, again, like from a media standpoint, I always like to joke, how are you going to be after you lose to the Packers by a field goal? And, how are you going to handle that? But I do think that from somebody who we don't really know very well, who's never had to do anything like this, to step in that room, cool, calm, comfortable, poised, like, yeah, I think he hit it out of the park.
Can I one more thing? Like
Yeah.
I thought he was more charismatic than I thought he would be, and I mean that as a very positive compliment of his charisma. Even like the little thing of being asked a question about the players to his right and then answering it to his left while staring directly at Caleb Williams, DJ Moore, Roma Dunze, and Cole Kmet, who were seated in the front row just like that. To have him now directly talk to the players about being comfortable with being uncomfortable, I think is the way he put it. Like to have him turn his attention to the players, to have some charisma, to have that eye contact. Like I like that. That's a positive sign to me, especially when you want to compare it to others who were in that situation before him, guys that we've covered before.
I'm glad you brought that up. I touched on that yesterday, but I'm not sure I made the point that I think is most important, which is I'll just use myself as the example. Like when I asked him my question to him, he looked me in the eye the entire answer, which made me feel like I couldn't look down at my computer to tweet or even write a note or like, like he had me captivated to the point that like whatever normal ADHD that might kick in for somebody in a moment where you start to tune out, you're like, no, I have to listen. I have to listen to this from start to finish. So I thought that was actually very notable. The way he talked to every single person, like very directly, like it was, yes, we're in this giant room with all these people, but I'm talking to you right now. And if he conducts his meetings that way, it's going to be hard for his players to tune him out. So, yeah, box checked, and an important box checked. Can you command a room? We talked about that endlessly with Ben Johnson, and honestly, I got varying opinions on that left me a little confused. Like I've had some people say, yeah, there's no doubt about it. And then I had others that say, sometimes it could be a little awkward. I didn't sense any awkwardness yesterday. So that I thought yesterday was a huge victory from that standpoint.
I took note of how the players kind of reacted to some of his answers as well. So I sat 2 rows behind Caleb and DJ and all those guys. A lot of head nodding, a lot of them like positioning themselves where, oh, I like this answer, where you can see the body language, you see them perk up a little bit. So I thought that was, well, at least notable, where you have this direct engagement from your players already here when they're being discussed, or Caleb's being directly discussed, and Ben's answering a question, then looking directly at Caleb. Like all that felt like positive signs for a first-time head coach in an experience that was a first for him at Hallis Hall.
Yeah, I was trying to remember. So, Johns, you mentioned, excuse me, Justin Fields was there in 2022, but I don't remember Justin Fields being in the press conference.
He wasn't in the room. He came in later.
Right. He came in later and spoke to us, and we thought that was a smart thing the Bears did, and that was a big deal. I don't remember any players being there for Nagy.
Nope.
I don't remember any players being there for John Fox. I wasn't at the Mark Trestman one, but
I remember Aaron Cromer and Jody Camilla sitting up in the balcony of Muggs Auditorium, but that was it. Jay Cutler wasn't there.
So that means there were 4 more players present yesterday than the previous 4 coach introduction press conferences combined. Again, don't know how much stock to put in that, but DJ Moore was in Disneyland with his family. Caleb Williams was in Florida. Cole Kmet coming off a crushing loss in Atlanta. And Hoge, I'm curious to hear from Cole on the pod later, why he made it a point to be there. But that means something. And I think that's a good sign about the fact that, like, and we've talked about this so much since Eberflus got fired, like, this is not a rebuild. Like, this guy's coming into a team that's got like a core of good players. So this isn't, that's why, like, I got yelled at on social media yesterday for making a comparison to Matt Nagy. but like, let's not do revisionist history here, okay? Like when Matt Nagy got here, people were really excited. And I know he wasn't a play caller, and you had the questions about the way the Chiefs season ended. I get all that. But that guy had energy. He was considered a young offensive mind. That team was considered a team that could take a step based on the way the defense played in 2017. They had the quarterback, and a lot of people in town felt really good about Matt Nagy, and that worked out for the first year. So comparing it to Eberflus and Trestman and Fox, like this one felt closest to Nagy, but still, obviously, there's still a lot more optimism in town about Ben Johnson, and he affirmed that optimism with the way he handled everything yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point, because I was going to say, if they're the closest comp I would have to yesterday's opening presser in terms of like who won it the most or whatever would be Matt Nagy's. I mean, he had the charisma, he commanded the room. Fans were very pleased with it. But the difference is what you also said in there, Kevin, that's the offensive credentials, though. Like Matt Nagy. One of the biggest things we were questioning him, even in that first press conference, was who exactly was calling plays here? How many did you call? You weren't really the play caller. Did you actually lose play calling in the middle of that game? Because I don't know if you remember that. Like Andy Reid was trying to take the blame for it. And it was unclear if he was just covering for Matt or like what was really going on. And with Ben Johnson, it's like play caller, 3 years, number one in EPA per play over that entire time. We know exactly, like there's the one thing we're not questioning at all is his ability to sequence plays, put it all together on game, make adjustments in the middle of the game, which Matt Nagy could never do. Like this is already all on tape. We know this going into this. So that's where it's like, I had to laugh when George said he had that comment yesterday, George McCaskey, where he's like, it's usually the most popular choice isn't the best choice. And I'm like, yeah, but a lot of times it is, and that's kind of like the problem you've had here. Is you're always like always hiring the unpopular choice, because we all still had to look up Matt Nagy, right? First time that came, Bears are hiring Matt Nagy. Okay, let's go to Wikipedia and see like his full rundown here. You know what I mean? Like nobody had to do that with Ben Johnson.
His resume, like even I said this in the last podcast. Like it would have been a fair question to ask him about that Jameson Williams. What do you call it? What was that pass?
Interception.
It was a Jameson Williams throw. Right?
Jameson, yes. But his offense still put up 500 something yards and scored 31 points. Like that is good, and you knew he was the one calling the plays. Like in all of that, you didn't have to ask for clarification, which I don't think we ever really got from Matt Nagy about the Andy Reid situation, like who was calling plays, when did you take over? It was always, I don't know. It's when his word salad started coming out, I think, back
well,
then.
we still don't know who called plays in the 2020 season finale.
True.
Jimmy Graham did.
The other thing about like, it's funny because the Bears beat the Lions in 2023, should have beat them at Ford Field this year. But I think that when Ben Johnson talked to us, Hoge, your question later on about the defense and what kept him up at night, and talking about Kyler Gordon and Jalen Johnson and Andrew Billings, like I think that was another little, tidbit about why he liked this team. It's like, I didn't like facing that defense, and now I get to help coach this defense. And so there's a little that familiarity with the division. And I had somebody reach out in the league, like the first thing they said when he got hired was he knows a division. And like, that's a good thing. Like, he knows these teams. He knows what it takes to win the division. I think that's so important, because I think early on we're like, part of me was like, why does he want to be in this division? Like, why would he want to compete with these teams he knows are so good? But the flip side is like, he knows how to beat them. He's seen it.
See, I'm so happy you brought that up. See, I would consider it a red flag if he's like, no, I'm scared of these guys. I don't want to compete with these guys. He was the exact opposite of that. In his intro, his own words, I want to be in this division. Like, that to me is like, okay, that's a really good sign. That's a coach who wants to compete. That's a coach who's confident in himself. That's a coach who believes in himself. That's a coach who has faith in what he's going to do here with Caleb Williams and the rest of the Chicago Bears. Like, I like that. If there's one like strong takeaway I have from the Ben Johnson day at Hallis Hall is that he really wanted to be here. Like, the Bears were his destination. To hear him share stories about going to the Cubs games, like I think with his brother-in-law, right? Like, that's the connection. And he's been doing it for years, that he likes the city, that he wants to be here. Like, the Bears just had to want him back, and this was going to work. They didn't have to overcomplicate this. So to hear that he wants to be in this division, that he wanted to be with the Bears, like, that's my strongest takeaway out of all this. And the Bears just had to reciprocate his feelings.
Yeah, and that part matters because I mean, this is a city that has been we've had our fair share of athletes, big high profile free agents that Chicago's tried to court that have turned Chicago down. Tracy McGrady, LeBron James, Manny Machado. I don't know how serious the Shohei Ohtani thing was, but they tried, right? Like, and it never happened. But like in this case, Ben Johnson was clearly, the highly prized coach of this cycle. If it wasn't Mike Vrabel, and the Bears actually got him. I mean, it's still a little stunning, like how fast it all happened. And I don't know how you guys feel. Like I believe that. Like I think that if the Lions had kept winning, he still would have ended up being the Bears head coach after the Super Bowl. Because it seems to be both ways, that he really wanted the Bears and the Bears really wanted him. I don't think the Bears would have pivoted just because, they kept winning. But to their credit, they were ready for the Lions losing, and then they moved very fast.
What do you think he said in his Zoom call? Like, how did he open his Zoom call with the Jaguars? Did he say, I want this job? Or did he say, I'm intrigued about this job, but Trent, what are you doing here?
I think what happened was, Johns, the Zoom started and it was Shad Khan first, and Trent Baalke was pulling an Adam Johns, was a little late to the Zoom. And he's like, Shad, I want this job. And then, but you got to do something about the general manager. And then Trent Baalke comes on, and then they kind of laugh it off. And I mean, obviously, I'm making that up, but I'm glad you brought that up, because you do kind of wonder, like, if the Jaguars made that move 3 weeks or 2 weeks ago, if we'd be having a different conversation today. I don't know.
I don't know. The pessimist, the cynic says yes, but the guy, the optimist who heard Ben Johnson explain his, we'll talk about Caleb Williams, talk about the Chicago Cubs games, like that in itself, wanting to stay in this division, says otherwise. You know what I'm saying? Like, there was so much other information from yesterday that would seem to say no to that idea of, if Baalke was out in Jacksonville, that's where Ben Johnson would be.
I think, and look, I make fun of the Bears leaning on their history a lot, because like they haven't won a Super Bowl in 40 years. But there is something to be said about stepping in that building when you see the George Halas statue and you walk through that hallway with the retired numbers that other franchises don't offer. And anybody who loves this sport and wants to be at the pinnacle of the NFL, I think, is taken by that. And I think the Bears are always going to have that to offer. And again, I am the first one to roll my eyes at it, but like, you feel it when you're in that building. Like, you get that people understand and respect the history of it. And like, it means more to say I'm the head coach of the Chicago Bears than it does for a few other teams in this league.
But you know what I love? He didn't talk about that history yesterday.
I know. He did not mention it at all.
I love that, man. Like, just keep it on now. Keep it on what this team has right now and like what it can be. And don't, like, it's just so unnecessary to be like, oh, I love, like.
Wait, did you say I love that man, or was it I love that man?
Comma.
I love that comma man.
Comma man.
Comma man. Yeah.
Comma man. Okay.
Put the comma in there. Yeah. And common man too. Yeah, no, because I was just like bracing for another press conference where it's just all about this great history. And I just wanted him to be like, you know what? I noticed there's one Super Bowl trophy in that lobby. That's what I noticed.
Yeah.
There should be
Like when the
more.
Bears draft players and they tell us their favorite player growing up was Walter Payton.
Yeah. We'll get to that in April though.
Ashton Genty, big Walter Payton guy.
Can we play my favorite clip from
Yeah.
yesterday's press conference? I just think it's just interesting to hear this after what we just covered with Matt Eberflus. Go ahead, Katie.
It's clear that modern football in the NFL is quarterback driven. That is no secret. You can look at analytics. Right now, quarterback success is a higher predictor of winning and losing than turnover ratio, which it's been for 20 plus years. Okay, that's changed. So there's no doubt Caleb played a large component into my decision. He is a phenomenal talent that had, as many quarterbacks do, an up and down rookie year. Where I see my role is as a supporter of him. This offense will be calibrated with him in mind. We're going to build this thing. This is not simply a dropping of a previous playbook down on the table and starting there. Nope. We're ripping this thing down to the studs, and we're going to build it up with him first and foremost, and then with the pieces around him next. I really look forward to challenging him and pushing him, as I said before, to continue to grow and develop.
How long have, I guess, even us in our coverage, like, just stuck by the old Lovie Smith way of, well, the turnover, the takeaways? Like, we know the percentages. Like, and then Matt Eberflus brings them back. And I even saw as a deposit myself, I called it the back to the future plan for the Bears because they know this works. But I don't know. I just found it extremely refreshing to hear the new head coach of the Bears be that so specifically direct about what it takes to win in the NFL right now and how Caleb's place in all of that is paramount. It was refreshing. If you're Caleb Williams, if you're the Bears, I'm sure that's exhilarating. And if you're a fan of the Bears, that has to be so encouraging in a league where you just watch quarterback after quarterback after quarterback hit 4,000 passing yards, hit 30 passing touchdowns all across the league, every division, journeymen, young guys, all across the league doing it. So to hear Ben Johnson articulate that the way he did, that was probably the most, it's another positive takeaway in a day that was full of them at Hallis Hall for me.
Do you think that Ben Johnson knows that of the top 13 teams in turnover ratio last year, only the Bears did not make the playoffs? For those curious, the Bears finished 9th in turnover ratio at +8, and everybody else ahead of them and a few behind them made the
Well, and I
postseason.
believe all 4 teams that won last weekend easily won the turnover battle. I don't think he's trying to say turnovers don't matter. I think he's more saying, and this was also something you could prove from this past Bears season, that winning the turnover margin doesn't guarantee you anything if you're not getting enough offense, if you're not getting enough, high enough play from your quarterback. Because remember, Caleb went 9, almost 10 games without throwing an interception. The Bears lost all of those games.
Yes.
Yep, bingo. Yep.
So
The Washington Commanders. The Washington Commanders were 15th in turnover ratio. They got really, really good quarterback play, and look where they are right now.
So score points.
Now, I do hope that whoever's the defense coordinator still does emphasize going after the ball constantly, knocking the ball out, getting takeaways. That's still incredibly important. But I think, another way to think about that is like, let's not think about it like the whole team, like, because that can still be very important for the defense. But for the offense, you might think about it more from, and there were some people during that interception streak, and I couldn't really argue with them, that were like, take more chances. Like, I know Mark Carmen on CSGO was like, throw an interception. I don't care. Like, let's see some actual pass. It's like they were being too careful. And so I think that's kind of more the point that Ben Johnson's trying to make there is like, throwing interception, turning the ball over might not necessarily be the end of the world if you're getting high enough quarterback play overall.
What was the rule that Matty Eberflus had for Justin Fields? The 100 rule, the 1100. What was that? Where
It
it
was
was
200 passing yards.
Oh yeah.
Was it 2 touchdowns, no turnovers or something?
Yeah, but the turnovers were emphasized. I thought it was like 1 rushing touchdown, one I forget exactly what it was. Someone will put it in the comments here, I'm sure later. But I thought about that in that moment as well. Probably should have looked it up, but go ahead, Kev.
Well, I'll say that clip, Johns, where he talks about calibrating the offense to Caleb Williams. Like we've obviously heard lots of play callers come to Hallis Hall and say, "I'm going to cater to the skill sets of these guys," and then they don't, right?
Yeah.
And I think because, like, look, we saw it with Nagy Trubisky, we saw it with Getsy Fields, we saw it with Waldron and Caleb Williams. Like, we saw these quarterback play caller marriages didn't work. What's nice about the Ben Johnson saying it is we have proof of concept, right? We saw Jared Goff. We saw him install an offense for somebody who was an average quarterback, turn him into an MVP candidate with an offense that he felt that Jared Goff could really thrive in. So like
Yes.
we've actually seen it.
Well, that kind of goes back to, so I had this, I mean, you guys saw it, Adam. Thank you for sharing it. Just the story I wrote on Ben Johnson's influences and how all his influences, guys like Mike Sherman, Bill Lazor, Adam Gase, Clyde Christensen, Mike Martz, I talked to all of them. Like, to see what he's built in Detroit, they didn't like. There's some of what they did, but it's his offense. They wanted that to come fully clear through the interviews that I did with him. Like, what he built in Detroit was his own. Ben Johnson built a monster. Ben Johnson built that Detroit offense, taking all the influences that he had, all the work that he's had in Miami and Detroit, and made it his own. I expect the same thing to happen here in Chicago with Caleb Williams. He'll pull from Lincoln Riley. He'll pull from others that he has influences from to find what works best for Caleb Williams in year 2. And that's going to change in year 3, year 4, as Caleb Williams gets better.
My favorite thing, by the way, John's, sorry, really quick, Hope, before, like when you mentioned all those names, I love that Bears fans are so excited about a guy whose mentors are John Shoup, Mike Martz, Adam Gase, and Bill Lazor. Because like normally Bears fans would be like, never utter the name, some of those names here again, but they see what Ben Johnson's done.
Yeah. Or it's the thing we're going to talk about in 4 years. No, there were a couple tweets yesterday I did see her like, are we just glossing over the John Shoup thing? And I was like, it's kind of funny that is happening. But to your point, like, he's taking bits and pieces from all this stuff. John Shoup was a good coach elsewhere, as most of these coaches tend to be when they're not at Hallis Hall. So, it's okay to, Mike Martz was once running the Gray Show on turf before he came to the Bears. Let's talk about that. What's next here? Because, Johns, first of all, right before we started here, you had some news that you tweeted out, so we should touch on that. But the next thing, and it started, I think, as soon as he got done with all this press conference stuff yesterday, is gotta hire this staff. This OC hire is going to be enormous. But first, let's start with Johns, what you learned this morning.
Yes, Thomas Brown, interim head coach, Chris Beatty, interim offensive coordinator / receivers coach, offensive line coach Chris Morgan, QB coach Kerry Joseph, and defensive coordinator Eric Washington are not going to be retained by the Bears. My understanding is that they started being told last night. Not surprising. If anyone deserves some credit, I would point at Thomas Brown for what he had to do in a difficult situation. Chris Beatty too, for being right there with them. Just an immensely difficult situation when you're trying to run Shane Waldron's offense without Shane Waldron being here. There's only so much you could do towards the end of the year. And Thomas Brown went from being passing game coordinator to offensive coordinator to head coach in a matter of less than 3 weeks. So I think the Bears should probably send him like a thank you package for everything that he had to do last year, especially if, that locker room could have gone all sorts of different directions. To see them finish with the win in Green Bay, it's a positive. It's a positive step to take in this season that even Ben Johnson can look at for his team to build off of.
Wouldn't shock me if Thomas Brown follows the Dan Campbell path. Remember Dan Campbell was the interim coach in Miami, and it's had to move on. Goes to the Saints. Was there for 5 years, and then he finally got his opportunity to be a head coach. I still think Thomas Brown's gonna be a head coach someday. I know the players respected the hell out of him, just from talking to them. So I'm not surprised at all to see that he's not gonna be part of the staff, though. I mean, in a lot of ways, there needs to be a clean break here, kind of a starting over process. I think most importantly, though, of all of those, I feel like Chris Morgan, that. They really need to start from scratch on that offensive line, get a new voice in there, and probably
something went wrong at some point. I don't know if he shouldn't have been retained under Waldron or whatnot.
Well, from what I understand, Johns, that kind of got off the rails here was they elevate him to this run game coordinator title, but Shane Waldron came in teaching different stuff.
Yeah, it's true.
And slightly not terribly starting over in the run game, but getting away from what they did well before under Chris Morgan. And so, yeah, that's right. I don't necessarily think it's all. I'm not trying to blame Chris Morgan for everything, but it was just something went astray last year with that hire where you give this guy this title, but seemingly actually took away some of his power over the run game at the same time. I think it's one of the many confusing things that happened in 2024 with the Chicago Bears.
Oh, the proof is what happened on the field later.
Yeah,
the Bears weren't a good rushing offense; they just weren't.
Yeah, well, I think that we've talked over and over again about the Shane Waldron hiring and how poor that process, the result was. I found it interesting going back to yesterday, some of the comments that were made by Ryan Poles and Kevin Warren, George McCaskey about all the people they talked to about Ben Johnson. I think it was clear they did not talk to enough people about Shane Waldron, maybe the right people. Felt like CHGO was talking to more integral people to that situation than the Bears did. And now, again, maybe they do this every time they hire a head coach, but they talked about talking to people that were with him in North Carolina when he was a player. So yeah. I don't know if that was a overcorrection on their part. But when we talk about 2024 season, I will say the number one biggest error was that hire, and they had to figure out the mistakes from that process and make sure they didn't make them in this one.
It's they become reporters in a sense. You know how this works, right? You hear one story and then a person mentioned that story about this person. You have to track down that person, and one interview leads to another interview. One anecdote needs to be clarified by another person because you need to have multiple sources. That's what we do as reporters. That's what I put into my reporting all the time. That's why I like the process, at least some of the information gathering by the Bears. I'll still mock them for interviewing 17 candidates because I didn't think they didn't have to go that far. And I'm sure some of the research and some of those candidates wasn't even close to what the Bears had in Ben Johnson. But to hear that they were doing more than their due diligence on Ben Johnson, knowing that he was going to be a top candidate this year, that in itself is encouraging for Ryan Poles as he took command. This is a win for Ryan Poles. You don't win a lot of things in the offseason, I get it, but he needed this win right now in January, at least to set himself up for something come later in the fall.
I think we end this episode on just we want to be a little reluctant about talking too much about the staff and possible hires because that might, be we might have a hire by the time you listen to this for all we know. But I still think it speaks to the importance of especially the OC hire. So needless to remind you guys, last two OC hires for the new coach, not somebody the coach had worked with before and not somebody that had a coordinator title before. and for my research on that coaching project I did, you got to check at least one of those 2 boxes. Really, the third box is retaining somebody, which we found out that's not happening. So that box isn't going to be checked, which is fine. That's kind of like a bonus thing. But I'm fascinated to see who Ben Johnson ends up getting. He has coached with a lot of people, but you're also making a hire, and this sometimes makes it tougher. Like, that person's not going to be calling plays, so it's not like the full OC job. But as we heard Ben talk about yesterday when we had that fireside chat with him, like, got to be somebody that he can trust, because he's well aware that he's going to have all these responsibilities. So he's going to have to delegate some of the offense to that OC. And as he kind of not jokingly said, somebody who's willing to stay up late at night with him in the office. So I don't know who it's going to be at this point, but better get it right. That's the main thing, though. Like, the press conference was all great, but these hires that are about to happen these next few days are crucial. As we learned last year with Shane Waldron, how horrible that was.
Yeah, well, here's the thing about hiring someone with, from within your own division is the Lions are going to do everything they can to put an end to it now. Like, there's going to be a wall put up. Like, Andy Reid wouldn't let Matt Nagy take anybody with him, right? And I did think it was a positive at a point that Matt Eberflus brought a lot of guys with him from Indianapolis. Now, things didn't turn out well for a lot of different reasons, but it'll be interesting to see if we can get somebody out of there with a promotion in some respect. But I'm sure the Lions will do everything they can to prevent Ben Johnson's staff to be full of, former Detroit Lions.
All right. And I also thought it was interesting that he said he's never met Dennis Allen.
Yeah.
Like, okay. I guess we'll see where that goes in the couple of days.
Again, it's another interesting thing because he did get Allen was recommended to Ben Johnson by Aaron Glenn, who needs a DC in New York, and by Dan Campbell, who also needs a DC in Detroit.
A lot of these dominoes are going to start to fall quickly. By the way, the thing on Aaron Glenn, I was thinking about this earlier while you guys were talking. So when we were talking earlier about how even when Matt Nagy was hired, we were asking questions about like, but what happened in that playoff game? And Ben Johnson didn't really have to deal with that yesterday because, the offense kind of did its job still. They still put up 500 yards of offense and all that. Aaron Glenn, that's Aaron Glenn's press conference. That's what that's going to be in New York. Because they just hired, and I like Aaron Glenn. And I think if you watch some of the Hard Knocks stuff, especially, like, he does give you a head coach vibe. But that's the type of thing that's going to happen in New York, where it's like, well, wait a minute, how come you couldn't get a stop the last 2 months of the season? So we'll see where he ends up.
I would say injuries, but
yeah,
you don't want your head coach making excuses.
By the way, one benefit to hiring guys you haven't worked with before that we learned from Matt Nagy is it's easier to scapegoat them after 2 years in the job when you need to make changes because your second season ends up being a massive disappointment.
Gav, we're just a day. You're not even less than 24 hours here.
Come on.
Right.
Good show, guys. Any final thoughts? Yeah.
No.
Kevin Fishbain. He can be reached at K Fishbain on the social medias.
Yeah.
I do not have my 2028 head coaching candidate list. I'm not even. I'm feeling good about this one.
Is Mike Kafka going to get a job?
Is the snow going to stop in New Orleans so he can interview there?
I don't know. Good point.
Oh,
how about that, by the way?
All right. We're out of here. What day is it? I keep forgetting. Thursday. We'll be back next week then. See where all this goes with the coaches over the next few days. Conversations are going to start turning into the draft too. Senior Bowls next week. Should be some good football games Sunday. I can't wait for those. Almost forget they're going on with all this coaching stuff. But we do have the AFC and NFC Championship on Sunday as well. So we'll have a lot to talk about next week. Appreciate everybody for sticking with us with the coverage. Again, read those guys at The Athletic, theathletic.com/Hoge Jahns. You should be subscribed there. They got a ton of great coverage up there on Ben Johnson's hire. And once again, Cole Kmet will be on CHGO today. He was in attendance for the press conference yesterday. It'll be interesting to get his thoughts on the hire and all that. So make sure you check that out as well. Talk to you next week.
See ya.